Is this level good? If I speak at this level?
Yeah, I'll just turn it
Yeah, could you hold all calls to bungalow 4?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable.
Good. Okay.
Did Ian or Dan tell you exactly what this is for?
No. Exactly what it's for? Why is there?
Well, I just don't know. But you should know what he's on, I guess.
He'll be on radio stations all over the country. It'll be
Fine. So your questions are going to be heard faintly in the background, but will be edited out.
Right. Exactly.
I understand. Oh, you're going to ask me the questions. Well, then I'll turn this way.
Oh, you, okay. Why don't we, first talk about your, how you, got interested in South African music and decided to go down there and see what was happening.
Okay, I thought you were going to get... I was hoping you were going to throw me one that was like, I hadn't heard.
Oh, we will, but we have to start with the basics, see.
In the summer of 1984, a friend of mine gave me a tape called Gumboots Accordion Jive Hits, Volume 2. And it was a copy of a copy of a copy. It didn't give any more information than the title. And I played it all summer long. It was an instrumental album of accordion, guitar, bass, and drum. And it was very infectious music that reminded me vaguely of mid-50s R&B, pop music out of the Atlantic School of record making, like Mr. Lee by the Bobettes, things like that. Towards the end of the summer, I started to improvise little melodies over these tracks, because essentially that's what they were. They were just sort of tracks. I mean, they didn't really have melodies. They just had rhythm and chords. And at that point, I began to think that it would probably be interesting to find this group and record with them. Except I didn't know who they were. I didn't know how to trace it down. So through Warner Brothers Records, I gave them the information about the title of the album, and the label was Gallo Records, which I hadn't heard of. And they came back to me and said, this record is South African. In fact, it's called Township Jive or Mbakanga music. It comes from Soweto. And it's street music it's black street music from South Africa. And again, Warner Brothers put me in touch with a producer in Johannesburg whose name is Hilton Rosenthal. And the reason they knew him was he produced a group called Juluka, which was the first interracial group to be popular in South Africa. In fact, to my knowledge, it's the only interracial group that attained any significant popularity. They were a group that was released on Warner Brothers Records. So that was my contact. When I called him and asked about this record, he said he would find out who it was, and he did, and it turned out to be a group called the Boyoyo Boys. And it wasn't a big hit record or anything. In fact, it was a couple of years old. It was just one of those underground tapes that get passed around from musician to musician. And then Hilton Rosenthal asked me when I had begun to get interested in South African music, and I said I really was totally unaware that this music came from South Africa. So he asked me if I'd like to hear some other examples of South African music, and I said, yes, of course. And he sent me about 20 albums of different styles of music, simple acoustic music to synthesizer funk records that sounded very much like American funk records. And I found that I was drawn to, I don't know if we can call it more traditional, but less of the pop and more of the more of the traditional South African music of different tribes. There was a Shangaan record by General Sharinda and the Gaza Sisters that I liked. There was a Sotho record by a group called Tawe Matsecha. And the Boyoyo Boys, as I said, was not a popular group. It was just one of those records that came out. And I asked if it was possible to go, and I asked if it was possible to record with these groups. So again, he had to check with the record company's producers, and he did. And it was possible to record with them. And it was possible to go there, which is something I wasn't aware of when I asked the question. I didn't know, could you go to South Africa? Or can you record? Are whites allowed to record with blacks? Or all kinds of questions like that. And the answer is yes, you can go. You have to apply for visas and things like that. And yes, whites can record with blacks. And so in early 1985, I went there with Roy Halley, who's an old friend of mine, and also the engineer that worked on all the Simon and Garfunkel records and did the concert in the park, and we went together. When I got there, the first night we were at a gathering at Hilton Rosenthal's house to introduce me to the music community in Johannesburg, both black and white. And as the evening wore on and the talk got more specific and more political, a couple of the black guys told me that the de facto musicians union in South Africa, de facto because the government doesn't allow them to have a union, but they had a black musicians union, and the leaders of that had taken a vote as to whether they wanted me to come there. This was something that I was unaware of when I asked if I could come. And they voted, obviously, I mean, I was there, so they voted for me to come because they had a specific goal that they wanted to achieve, and that was to get South African music out into the international music community. And they felt that they were suffering under what they called a double apartheid, which was they're living under apartheid at home, and they're living under a repressive, intolerable political climate. And also, when they tried to export their music, black music, they were running into a resistance from the world music community because they were South African. So they were doubly frustrated, if frustrated is indeed an adequate word to describe. Yes, that's right. So their hopes were that I would be able to expose this music to a larger audience because I was known. I was a well-known recording artist.
Now, who were these guys you brought with you on Saturday Night Live? They were pretty intense.
Well, I brought two groups with me. The rhythm section comes from Soweto. It's basically a band called Stimela. And they played on two of the tracks. And the singers that you saw are a group called Ladysmith Black Mambazo. They're very well known, very, very much loved group in South Africa. They're Zulu. They come from the township of Ladysmith. That's where they take their name. It's near Durban on the Indian Ocean. They're an a cappella group, 10 voices, and a church group. The lead singer and composer is Joseph Shabalala. He's a reverend. And we collaborated on two of the songs on the album, but one complete song, and that was in a total collaboration. That song is Homeless. The collaboration was 50-50 in every sense. I wrote the English language sections. He wrote the sections in Zulu. I wrote some of the melodies. He wrote some of the melodies. And together we worked out the structure of the song, which was a fairly complicated structure that began with one section that I had written in advance and given to them, and then other sections that they added on to the end, and then added on to the beginning. So we began the song in the middle, and it evolved outwards to the beginning and to the end. Those were the groups on Saturday Night Live.
They dress like that all the time, or did that like show dress?
That's traditional Zulu tribal outfits, and in their case it's what they wear on to perform. They don't dress like that all the time, no. It's, probably early 20th century or 19th century dress. I mean, they're dressed in skins and,
like
robes.
You dress up to go on stage.
That's right. That's their stage costume, but it's rooted in tradition, in Zulu tradition.
I think I saw Cyndi Lauper wearing something similar. Do they speak English and the tribal language both?
They speak English. Yes, they speak English fairly fluently, particularly Joseph, who also can write in English. But their main language is Zulu.
How well is Western music in South Africa? Is it well known in these tribal?
U.S. music, you mean?
You are.
Some of the musicians that I work with there knew who I was, and some of them had never heard of me, and didn't speak English, and presumably didn't have very much knowledge of American music. The players from Soweto, they were very familiar with American music, American pop music, and in fact, the big bands there were playing in styles that you could trace to, contemporary American bands.
Did they warm up to you, or were they hesitant, or how did they react to you as a person? Did they trust you?
Yes, the interaction with the musicians that didn't speak English was more tentative and a little less fluid, naturally, than with the other players. But I did have an interpreter who was also their producer, and so we were able to work. And with musicians, if the playback sounds good, people are happy and they warm up, and if not, they're frustrated. They're not happy. But the music was coming out. Very good. They may have not have known what I was going to do with it, because in fact I didn't know what I was going to do with it, because I was just going there to cut backing tracks. And when I was there, the way I'd work was we'd go in the studio and they would begin to play either a song that they knew or some riff that they began, and I would everybody have headphones on, and I would sing into a microphone. I'd sing a melody and some lyrics, scat lyrics that didn't have any meaning, but just to put phrases and melodies together to outline a structure for the song. And that way they could hear what the structure was going to be. And then later I'd erase my demo vocals, and in the months that followed, in fact it took about 18 months to finish, from the start to finish, I had time to think about what the melodies should be more deeply and to work out what the lyrics would be.
How long were you actually in Africa, South Africa?
About 2 weeks.
You find that there are social norms in this community that you're in. I mean, are they really strange? Are they strange to you at all?
Well, as you probably would imagine, there's a tremendous underlying tension beneath the surface normality. Now, this was in early 1985, and there was not quite the steady occurrence of violence that we've had in the time since then, but there was always the sense that there was enormous strife, racial strife, right below the surface, and coming from America, which is a multiracial society in which has experienced its own racial tensions. This was something that was far beyond anything that I had ever experienced. As I say, there is a surface normality, but you will be able, without being in the country for very long, you will understand and begin to feel that the turmoil that lies just beneath.
Did you experience any pressure when people knew that you were a white guy working with these black guys? Did anything happen?
No, I didn't feel any. I was mostly in a cocoon situation. I went from my room to a recording studio most of the time, although I did spend a little time in Soweto. I went with some friends, black friends of mine. They lived in Soweto, and they took me there.
When you were in the middle of this project and then you had gone too far to turn back, did you wonder what you were doing or how it would come out? Or did you know exactly, were you driven towards a specific end, or were you just feeling your way?
More feeling my way. I began by going over there hoping to record with these 3 groups that I had heard on the records that I liked, not knowing whether the recordings would produce anything that would be usable or that I could write to. And when I was there, I met several other groups that I later recorded with, and they, in fact, became the mainstays of this record. And they were the musicians that I took out and brought to New York to record. And they were and Ladysmith Black Mambazo, who I met during my stay there. We recorded in London. So I didn't really know where the project was going to go when I began. I began because I loved the music. And as the tracks started to accumulate, and as I began to learn more about how to record with it, the album started to grow into an album that was mostly South African music. When I finished my first trip there, when I came back, I had 5 cuts on the album. Then the following May in New York, we cut 2 more tracks. And then the next October, I recorded in London with Ladysmith Black Mambazo. And because I thought the album was going to be released in late May or early June of '86, that's why everyone was gathered to do Saturday Night Live. But then the album was pushed back to a late August release date. So we had all the players that I like to work with there and a couple of extra months. So we cut another track, and then the last track that we cut is Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. And that track combines really the rhythm section and Ladysmith Black Mambazo, because they were both there in New York together.
What were they like when they saw New York? It was the first time they'd seen anything like it.
Right. It was a culture shock, no question. The thing that I remember most about it, aside from their amazement at the intensity of the city and the size, was Isaac Machali was the drummer with this rhythm section. And he said, he asked me at one point, very early on when he arrived, where do we have to go to register with the police? See, so the reality of life in South Africa for blacks, as I said, it's just the harsh reality is just below the surface. So this was the first time that he was ever in a free society. It was the first time that they'd ever been on a plane or traveled outside of their country. Same for Ladysmith Black Mambazo. That was their first time ever in America. They had traveled to Europe before, but it was their first time in New York, and they acted, like tourists. They wanted to see the Statue of Liberty and the different sites, and they performed. There's a fairly significant, fairly large expatriate South African community in New York, and they knew people. When they performed at a club in New York, SOBs, there was a lot of people came down to see them. Who they from home, as well as people had heard about that they were going to perform there. Whites who had heard and wanted to come and see them.
Do you think they had thoughts of maybe wanting to move here if they could?
No, most of them didn't think about moving here. One of the guys, Bagiti Kumalo, is the bass player, and he is thinking about coming here. A lot of people asked about whether he would be available to play on record dates, and he is seriously thinking of coming here and trying to work here as a musician. But the rest, they have families, they have homes, they have careers, and I don't think they seriously thought of moving here.
Is there a similarity in black music in Africa, like you find like in New York in the suburb city life, where there's rapping and breakdancing? Is there that kind of similarity that you find on it?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Like, do they have similar ways of expressing their music?
Like the sound, the street music is their sound, which just came up from their souls. Anything like the street music that comes up on the streets in New York or Chicago.
Is there a universality, I guess I'm trying to say, in music from living in suppressed societies, like you find in maybe in New York?
I see what you mean. Did I just shut off?
No, I'm just playing this now.
Oh. No, there's not a similarity to inner city music. As I said, their ears are attuned to funk, American funk, and to jazz. But I don't think that they're particularly aware of rap music. And rap has a lot to do with language. And English is not their primary language. They speak English, but rap is not about instruments for the most part. A drum machine and a DJ, maybe a guitar now. But these bands are bass, drums, keyboard, and the more traditional and the more raw sounding bands that I work with, they use the accordion. And those sounds come from their tribal sounds that are old, and I don't think they would even, some of those people like Tau Matsecha or Sharinda, I don't think they would, absolutely unaware of what's happening in this culture.
So their only influence is their own history.
of those people. But I mean, that would be the equivalent of I don't know what country people. They came from far away. They were not living in a big urban scene, which Soweto is. I mean, Soweto is 1.5 million people in a 20 square mile radius, and people come from all over and live there. So Soweto is the most sophisticated black township in South Africa.
It's all black people there?
All black. That's right.
How many instruments do you play?
Do I play?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I primarily play guitar. I can play different percussion instruments and very little keyboard. Enough to pick out harmonies and things like that, but I wouldn't.
Who's Al?
Well, I'll tell you the story of that. Not that it makes any sense at all, but years ago, I had a party with. There was a party at my house, and a friend of mine said, "Could I bring Pierre Boulez over to the party?" And I said, "Yeah, of course you can bring Pierre Boulez." Do you know who Pierre Boulez is? Pierre Boulez was at the time the conductor of the New York Philharmonic. He's now he's internationally known conductor and composer of modern music. So he came to visit. I never met him, and he came to visit us. And my wife's name was Peggy. So they introduced us. You know, this is Paul. This is Peggy. This is Pierre Boulez. How do you do? How do you do? Well, he stayed at the party for whatever, 45 minutes or an hour. And then when he left, he said to me, "Well," he said, "thank you for having me, Al, and give my best to Betty." So I said, "All right, I will." For a couple of weeks after that, we called each other Al and Betty. So that's where that comes from. Not that anybody would ever figure that out, or not that it has any other meaning other than that it was just something that we laughed about.
Does he know this?
No, I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure he doesn't remember anything about me or the party.
Get him on the phone. Let me talk to him.
He's probably not that tuned into like whatever the singles are on Graceland.
You don't think so, huh? So what will be the next single after that? Yeah.
It looks like it's going to be Graceland, or The Boy in the Bubble, or Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. That's what it looks like at the moment.
Do you have a choice? I mean, do you have a favorite?
Well, those three are pretty close to my. I think those three are pretty close to the best on the album, along with Homeless. Personally, I don't. My favorite two songs on the album are Graceland and Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes. Homeless, of course, is in its own category. I mean, being half English, half Zulu, I wouldn't expect it to be a single, but I think it sort of stands alone in the album.
Can you talk a little bit about what Graceland is about, the inspiration for it?
Well, it's not about Elvis Presley or Graceland. I began to write those lyrics, and I really didn't know why I was writing those lyrics, and I resisted it because I thought, well, now I'm gonna imply that I'm writing, either a nostalgia piece or some ode to Elvis Presley, and I had no intention of doing that, although I happen to be a big Elvis Presley fan. But no, I meant the words Graceland more to be about a state of grace than the actual place in Memphis, Tennessee. And when I began to write the song, I had never even been to Graceland. But after I finished my recording with Rockin' Doopsie in Louisiana, the Cajun band, the Zydeco band, I rented a car and I drove up through the Mississippi Delta up to Memphis to see if there was some reason that I was writing about Graceland that I really didn't know about. And there are elements of my visit that have permeated the song, but still, essentially, the song is not about, as I say, it's not about Graceland or Elvis. It's more about finding a state of grace or a state of peace or a state where you feel at peace.
Is there a way that you find that in your life?
Yes, I think that there are many ways that people can find that. Or are you asking me personally?
Yeah.
Like, are you spiritual, or is that what you're getting at?
It comes through, I think, an effort at understanding and a willingness to be forgiving of. If you can do that, you can feel more at peace. I don't think it's an easy thing to do, but by working at it, you may be able to arrive at it from time to time. And then other people have other ways of going for it. But definitely one can get there if it's an important place to be.
Now, if there wasn't a Graceland already in Memphis, and you had a choice to name such a place where it would be with your intentions, where would that be?
It's not a place.
Well, I know, but it's mental for you. I know what you're saying,
yes,
but where you could achieve that, where is that place?
It's not a place.
I know, it's mental, but I'm saying if you had a physical place, where would that be for you? I mean, if you had a choice to name Graceland.
My point is, the place doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
The physical location doesn't matter. It's not about a physical location. It could be any number of places, I suppose. For me personally, it could be any number of. It doesn't really matter where it is. It's about how you view your life and how you view your life as it interacts with the world around you. So you needn't be in one particular place.
Well, when you were a kid growing up, did you have the freedom to pursue what you wanted in life, or your dreams? Were your parents supportive?
Well, I did pursue what I wanted, and it's something that I wanted since really about the age of 13. It's when I began to be interested in writing songs, making records, and that I started writing songs when I was 13, and I made my first record when I was 15.
Did you surprise yourself?
No, I was not at an age where anything was surprising. I don't think anything is very surprising when you're 15. Looking back, I think it's surprising. Yeah, that's right.
Well, how did that come about at age 15? Someone that it is great.
Well, it wasn't just me. I was with my old friend Art Garfunkel, and we just went around to little record companies in New York and sang and played the guitar and sang the songs that we wrote. And eventually somebody said, "I'd like to record you," and that's sort of how it happened, just as easy as that. And we were still in high school, and we made our first record, and it was something of a hit.
What did the other kids at school think?
Oh, I imagine they were surprised.
you just knew you could do it and you went and did it? You didn't think?
Oh no, we were very excited. We didn't assume that we were going to make a record. It was that was like a dream. But it was at a time in rock and roll when people were pretty young. So, I mean, Frankie Lyman and the Teenager. Frankie Lyman was 13 years old when he made his record, and a lot of the groups from the 50s were teenagers, and they were young. Elvis Presley was only 19 or 20, and he was older than everybody else. So the general age of recording acts was considerably younger. I mean, it didn't get up until like the 20s, where people were in their 20s, until the 60s, which was my generation. When we got into our 20s, we began to record, and that's about the age that you see groups emerge now.
Do you think it changed how you are as a person today? The fact that you had that success so young, do you think it made you more confident or changed your personality in any way?
It's impossible to know because how would I? You'd need a control experiment. I'd have to have grown up without having this and been whoever I would have been without this for me to know. I don't know. It's really a moot point. I mean, this is what happened, and this is who I am. So speculation about what I would have been is kind of irrelevant, really.
Did you feel different 1 year at school than you had the year before?
No, what it did was I became interested. My interest in music and in writing and in making records had an outlet, and also I really began to be a professional at a very early age. Although I mean I was still in school, and I continued through school and through college, but I was working in recording studios a lot, and I was learning about the record business and about recording technique and about writing songs and about being on stage, and without really thinking at that point that this is going to be my life's work or that this is going to be a career that I'm going to pursue for the next 25 years or so. I had begun on it, and when I look back on it now, it seems just natural or even inevitable that would have led to where I am now. I mean, of course, the fact that I was able to write hits was that wasn't predictable. But my interest, the same subject that interested me at the age of 13, has remained now 30 years later. I'm still interested in the same subject.
So why did most people that get into rock and the whole bit at an early age don't pursue a traditional education? Why did you pursue that?
Well, I wouldn't make any generalization about people in rock at all. I mean, I don't know whether they pursue their education or not. There's a lot of musicians who are very well trained, who study and go to school, study their instrument at schools, at colleges.
Why did you go?
I didn't study music at school. I learned. My father was a musician. So I grew up with. I realized that I could sing when I was about 10 or 11, and the way I realized it was, I was in an assembly at school, and we had to wait to get on the bus to take us home. So we would all sit in an assembly waiting for the bus to come to pick us up, and kids would get up and entertain the group. So one day this blonde, curly-headed kid gets up and sings "They Tried to Tell Us We're Too Young," and that was Art Garfunkel. And everybody made a tremendous fuss over him. And so I began to think, hey, maybe I can sing. So that's when I discovered that I could sing, was sort of watching him. So I was musical at an early age, and because of Elvis Presley, I wanted to play the guitar, so my father bought me a guitar. And I was basically self-taught until many years later when I went back to study with different teachers to study harmony and theory and things like that would help me in my writing. But up until then, I didn't study music in school. I was an English literature major.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother.
So when you became a recording star, how did it change the family?
Oh, it didn't change the family. I mean, I think they were sort of surprised and pleased about it, and didn't expect that it would go any further than the first record, which, we were 15. I mean, it was just a big, pleasant surprise, that's all. We were just high school kids, and we had a record, and the record sold, and we made some money, and we were on television, and everybody was very pleased and happy. Nobody really ever thought that it was going to go further and past that. And Simon and Garfunkel didn't become big hits until we were 23 or 24 years old. By that time, I had been doing this all throughout school, and then when I left school, and so I don't think anybody was surprised that I was going to be in music.
When you see art again, is there always a bond between you two because you experienced all this together?
Yes, that and the fact that we grew up in the same neighborhoods and we knew each other long before any of this occurred. So we have a knowledge and a vision of ourselves as 11-year-olds. So we know each other pretty well. We can always snap back into that mode. And that's easy and comfortable.
With all the resurgence going on right now of the 60s and the whole bit, a lot of the music right now is 60s music that's being redone. Do you think that you might redo some of your older music? Or
yeah, put it in a movie soundtrack, it'll be a hit all over again.
Well, it's always been a temptation to redo some of the old things and sort of fix them.
The modern technology.
No, it's not the technology. I like to fix the writing.
Really?
That's what I like. That's what I like to fix. But I probably won't ever do that.
When you hear things and it bothers you?
Oh yes.
Like what?
Oh well, I don't know. Like a lot of things. When you're doing it and something bothers you and you say, well, I guess it'll be okay. It's never okay. Every time you hear the record, it's always there.
Are you too perfect? Are you a perfectionist till the very end, and is that why it bothers you?
It bothers you because you have some vision of how it's supposed to be, and that's not what was realized. It could be that I didn't know how to do what I heard in some part of my brain. Or it could be that we ran out of time, or maybe it was a compromise on an early record. Maybe Art wanted one thing and I wanted another, and so there was a compromise, and when I hear it I always think, well, that's his pick and that's not my pick. I wouldn't have done it that way. But basically I hear me learning how to write and how to record, and I hear the mistakes. Some of the songs are really not they're really not good enough to even bother to fix, but some of the songs are pretty good and have a few things wrong with them, and theoretically if I were writing those songs today I would correct them before before I recorded them, before I finished the writing process. But really, rather than do that, it's more interesting to write a new one.
You're always searching for different influences, and you've done this South African thing. That was pretty incredible. What's next?
I don't know what's next. I really don't think that way.
Do you have a curiosity of what you'd like to do?
A curiosity is what makes you do what you're going to do. That's the most fun part, is to allow your curiosity to lead you and see what you're interested in. So the next thing that I'll do will be to try and look and see what I'm interested in. I mean, it's not necessarily so that I'll be interested in another cultural form of music. I mean, I may decide that I want to write a certain type of song, and then I'll do that with a rhythm section from New York. Or I really don't know. I mean, the fun is to see what it is that you want to do and what you're interested in, and then try and make it as good as you can. This project, as I explained earlier, just happened gradually, bit by bit. I didn't have a vision, and I didn't say, "Oh, I know that South African music is going to be a hip choice." I mean, in the summer of 1984, nobody was thinking about that as any, they weren't thinking about that in any way, and nor was I. And even as it went along, I still didn't think of it as anything other than a music that I really loved. I didn't even think particularly about the political consequences or implications of what I was doing until I was well into it. So I don't know what the next thing will be. That's my reward for this. I can go and try and entertain myself and find something interesting. I find a lot of musical styles and cultures interesting, a lot. And I like mixing I like mixing sounds too.
Is there a particular phase of music that you don't care for, that, in the 70s was disco and...
I never really did like disco too much. Although even there's some good records. I mean, almost every style can produce something that's good. I guess at this point, one could say that I'm not terribly in tune with the top 40.
Well, we could rattle them off for you, that'd be no problem.
Hi, this is Paul Simon on KISS 108 in Boston, on B106 in Washington, on KRBE in Houston, on WMMS in Cleveland, on WHTX in Pittsburgh, on K-Hit in Seattle, on Y100 in Miami, on Power 99.7 in Atlanta, on WLOL in Minneapolis, on Y98 FM in St. Louis, on Denver's Best Hit Rocks?
I think it's Denver's Best Hit Rocks.
Oh, I see, okay. On Denver's Best Hit Rocks, Y108, on WNES in Indianapolis, on KISS FM in Hartford, on KGW in Portland, on BJ 105 in Orlando,